They called her Great Gusting, not just for expanding an empire, but for mastering the art of power after seizing the throne. She faced her greatest challenge, transforming Russia. This is how Catherine the Great truly became the Great. Tonight, we begin an unforgettable walk through chilled corridors and whispered secrets. You are 16, and the snow is already in your boots before you even step out of the carriage. Your breath curls through the air like a ghost trying to escape your body. You clutch your mother's arm too tightly, and she hisses for you to behave. Royalty, she reminds you, doesn't tremble. But your knees absolutely do. Ahead looms the palace, massive, pale as bone, and flanked by guards with expressions carved from frost. You've heard it called Peterhof, but it may as well be the mouth of a wolf. You've been promised a Grand Duke Peter, a cousin of the Empress, a Romanov by blood, which sounds elegant until you meet him. His nose is red from drink. His laugh comes too fast, like he's reading the script of a party no one else is attending. Still, you curtsy. Still, you smile. Still, you remind yourself this is your chance to become Empress of Russia. But the court doesn't look at you like you're a bride. They look at you like you're a spy. Or worse, a foreigner with ambitions. And they're right. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You try not to trip as you're led down a hallway longer than your old village square. The walls are dripping with gold. Real gold. The kind that could feed 1,000 families. Here it's used for wallpaper. You wonder, do the walls ever get tired of being so ornate? The Grand Duke's aunt, the Empress Elizabeth, has eyes like winter glass and lips that never unpurse. She greets you like she's greeting a minor inconvenience. You smile anyway. "You'll do," she murmurs. "For now." You sleep in a room with a chandelier heavier than your horse back home. The mattress smells like lavender, but you can't fall asleep. You can feel the palace watching. And somewhere in that building is your new husband, Peter. He's not the man you imagined. He's odd. You meet him the next morning. He's dressed in Prussian military uniform and insists on showing you his toy soldiers, yes, actual miniatures. He makes cannon noises with his mouth. He reenacts battles where he always wins. Historians still argue whether Peter was mentally unstable or simply emotionally stunted by a brutal upbringing. But you don't need a historian to know this man shouldn't run an empire. He asks if you brought any dolls. You nearly laugh. Instead, you talk about philosophy, hoping to steer the conversation to something resembling real governance. He yawns. When he finally leaves you, sit quietly for a moment, hands folded, trying not to scream. And so begins your training. Not in warfare, not in politics, but in observation. You watch the way servants speak more carefully around some nobles than others. You memorize which advisors drink with which guards. You learn that behind every fan flutter is a message, and behind every polite toast is a threat laced with French wine. They don't teach you this in books, but it turns out you're a fast learner. There's a rumor the Empress chose you for your pliability, but the court doesn't understand one key thing. A sponge doesn't just soak in water. It holds it, and it can squeeze it back out. Your wedding is not romantic. It's ceremonial, political, and long. So long, in fact, that halfway through you start counting how many nobles are wearing the exact same expression of practiced boredom. 23, 24, 25. You lose count at 30 because someone jabs you in the ribs to kneel. The gown is beautiful layers of silk and pearls so heavy you can barely move. Your veil smells faintly of mothballs and regret. Peter looks like a child forced into his grandfather's shoes. He fidgets. He sweats. He grins too wide when he drops the ring. Everyone laughs. You do not. That night you lie beside him in a bed that could fit 6. And he talks. Not to you, to himself. About military formations, about his toy soldiers, about how he plans to modernize Russia using Prussian discipline and German beer. You close your eyes and imagine home. Not because you miss it, but because at least there you weren't married to a powder keg in a wig. Historians still argue whether your marriage was ever truly consummated. You don't comment on that. Not in letters, not in memoirs, not even in passing. Because it doesn't matter. What matters is that you've just been yoked to a man who barely notices you exist, and everyone in court now knows it. Which means they stop fearing you. And that is your first advantage. You play the part. You walk beside him in processions. You wave when he waves. You smile when he sneezes. You nod when he talks about winning wars he's only ever reenacted in his room with figurines. Let them think you are harmless. Let them think you are lost. Because in the shadows, you're studying them all. You learn which nobles secretly detest Peter, which generals still mourn the Empress's last lover, which maids are fluent in Polish and which in lies. You attend balls not for the music, but for the intel. Who dances too closely, who drinks too little, who leaves the room every time the same name is spoken. You keep a mental map of alliances, of debts, of hidden doors. Even your pregnancy is a performance. When it finally happens, it's cause for celebration or speculation. Because if Peter is more interested in dolls and muskets than you, whose child is, this whispers slip through the palace like perfume, Count Orlov, a guard, a stable boy. You say nothing, because the more they whisper, the more they look at your belly and not your brain. The child is born healthy. A boy. And for the moment, that's enough to secure your place. But nothing in Russia stays secure for long. Peter grows more erratic. He drinks more. He pretends to be Frederick the Great in public. Once he orders a real cat court-martialed for spying. You keep smiling. You keep nodding. You keep the mask on so well. You start to forget where your own skin ends and the mask begins. Your ladies-in-waiting are careful. Your servants are careful. Your thoughts are not. Because under that carefully arranged hair and behind those practiced curtsies, you're planning something much larger than anyone in the Winter Palace imagines. Not a divorce, not a departure, but something final. And that's when you meet Count Orlov. Not formally, not romantically. At first, he's just a name, a noise, a reputation in boots. But reputations can be tools, and you're done playing dress-up. He doesn't look like a savior. Grigory Orlov is not the kind of man you find in painted portraits or tragic ballads. He's broad-shouldered, blunt-nosed, and smells vaguely of steel and leather polish. But there's something about him, something you clock instantly. He listens. You're introduced during a military inspection where Peter is too busy ordering soldiers to goose-step like Prussians to notice your eyes linger a little too long on Orlov's calloused hands. He doesn't bow too deeply. He doesn't flirt. He just sees you. That in itself is unnerving. Because most men at court either fear you, mock you, or worse, ignore you. But he treats you like a storm he's already decided to chase. Not yet a lover, but already dangerous. Orlov isn't from the highest nobility. He's a soldier by trade with a brother in the guards and a knack for making friends where it matters. He has scars, he has rumors, and he has influence, especially in the one place Peter does not, the army. You begin to talk more. over breakfasts you don't touch, in corridors supposedly empty, during dances where the music drowns out the treason in your voice. Not yet about revolution, just dissatisfaction. Shared frowns, shared silences, shared glances that linger a breath too long. Historians still debate whether your relationship began with strategy or seduction. But for you, it was both. Because when power doesn't give you protection, you start building your own. Orlov is not the only name in your little book of allies. But he's the one with teeth. Peter begins to notice. Not your affair. You're calm. Because you've stopped reacting to his tantrums, his ridiculous uniforms, his monologues about painting over Orthodox churches with portraits of himself. You don't flinch anymore. That makes him nervous. He begins holding court without you. He bars you from military reviews. He writes letters complaining that you laugh too often. You do. Because nothing terrifies insecure men more than a woman who laughs without asking permission. Meanwhile, Orlov begins collecting others. Brothers, friends, officers who once saluted Peter and now roll their eyes behind his back. No one says the word coup yet, but it's in the air, like ozone before lightning. You host dinners now, carefully, quietly. No politics, just friendship. No sedition, just philosophy. You quote Montesquieu between bites of salted duck. You smile while asking generals how they really feel about Peter's Prussian love affair. And no one says yes. But no one says no. One night, Orlov stays too long. The fire dies. The plates are cleared. You don't speak. You just look at each other. And in the silence between breaths, something settles. You're no longer just plotting. You're promising. Not marriage, not love, but revolution. It will take months. Careful notes, stolen uniforms, messages folded and passed like secrets under glass. One maid will disappear. One guard will be bribed. One gun will jam at the worst possible time. But it will happen. Because it must. Because you are tired of being a foreign bride with soft hands and hard thoughts. Because Russia deserves more than a boy playing emperor. And you, well, you are not here to play. You are here to rule. They say the coup begins with a whisper. But for you, it starts with a cough. A small, almost apologetic sound from a page outside your chamber door announcing a coded letter folded inside a book of sermons. You don't read it immediately. You sip your tea. You count the seconds. You wait until no one's watching. Then you open it. One word. Ready. The plan is simple, which is to say incredibly complicated, terrifyingly delicate, and entirely dependent on people who may or may not betray you before breakfast. Peter is out of the capital vacationing at Oranienbaum, his beloved faux Prussian palace filled with clockwork toys, mirrors, and the echo of his own voice. He thinks the throne is secure. He thinks you are writing poetry and brushing your hair. You are not. You are assembling uniforms. You are sealing letters. You are praying not to God, but to timing. Historians still argue whether Peter ever suspected your exact intentions. Some believe he considered you too meek for rebellion. Others think he knew but underestimated you. Either way, by the time his messengers reach him, it's too late. You ride out before dawn. In men's clothes, because symbolism matters. Your hair is tied back, your boots muddy, your eyes sharp. When the guards see you, they don't hesitate. They kneel, one by one, a line of bent heads and silent loyalty. Orlov kisses your hand like it's already crowned. You don't smile. You don't have time. The soldiers swear allegiance not to Russia, but to you. You ride to the Kazan Cathedral. The priest is trembling. You recite the oath calmly. the crowd assembled at knife point or drawn by rumor cheers. You are declared sovereign, not queen, not consort, empress. You don't even flinch. By mid-afternoon, the city is yours. Peter gets the news while playing with his dog. He laughs. He thinks it's a joke. Then the second messenger arrives. He panics. He tries to flee. He signs an abdication letter badly written, smeared with what might be ink or tears, and sends it back with a trembling courier. You do not respond because you no longer need permission from a man who lost a kingdom over breakfast. But here's where things get sticky. See, Russia is big and messy and full of people who don't always read memos in time. Peter is still technically alive, and that is a problem. Dead emperors don't lead counter-coups, but living ones, even pitiful, humiliated, mocked ones, they inspire ghosts. Your allies disagree on what to do. Some say exile, some say arrest, some say poison, you say nothing. But Peter dies. Mysteriously, peacefully, they claim. Accidentally, they whisper. Was it Orlov? Was it someone else? Did you order it? Historians still argue. You don't comment. Because silence sometimes is the most terrifying confession. The funeral is quiet. No one cries. Not even the dog. You wear black, not for mourning, but for optics. Russia doesn't need an empress with blood on her hands. Russia needs an empress with vision. And you're just getting started. You step out onto the palace balcony the next morning. The sky is unusually blue. The wind doesn't bite for once. Below, the city waits, and you raise your hand not to wave, to claim. Because now that the crown is on your head, everyone who cheered must also kneel. And those who don't, well, you're keeping a list. They say absolute power corrupts absolutely. But you've just acquired it, and honestly, it feels more like clarity. The minute Peter is gone, the palace changes. The walls don't creak as much. The servants breathe differently. The courtiers smile harder, but blink just a little too fast. Everyone is waiting to see what kind of ruler you'll become. Will you be gracious, cruel, forgetful? You keep them guessing. You move into the Winter Palace without ceremony. You send thank you notes to key nobles before they expect them. You attend Mass without being prompted. You even visit the guards' quarters just once, just long enough to be remembered as the Empress who noticed their cracked boots. But behind the politeness, you're reorganizing everything. You clean out the Privy Council like it's a pantry full of expired gossip. You promote men who weren't even on the court's radar last year. Military men, financial minds, a few dangerously literate clerks. Historians still debate whether your early reforms were planned or improvised. But from the inside, it doesn't matter. Because the court is off balance. And you like it that way. You host salons now. Not just for poetry or idle talk, but to test people. Will they laugh at your jokes too loudly? Will they disagree with you too boldly? Will they ask about Peter? Will they not ask? You catalog it all. One noble spills wine on your sleeve. He stutters through his apology. He is reassigned to a remote border province 2 weeks later. You don't mention the wine. The courtiers learn quickly you see everything. And that scares them. But fear has uses. It keeps people polite. Still, not everything is neat. There's your son, the boy you bore in that miserable marriage. Paul. He's odd, twitchy, a little too invested in toy soldiers, and unfortunately very much the child of Peter. You don't trust him. He doesn't trust you, and every time he visits it, feels like a rehearsal for some future betrayal you haven't written yet. So you keep him at arm's length. Not because you hate him, but because you can't afford to love him too openly. He's being raised by others, educated, dressed, paraded. And yes, one day he might wear your crown. But not soon. Not while you're still breathing. You don't say this out loud, but he knows. Meanwhile, your allies begin changing. Some get comfortable, some get loud. Orlov, for all his early usefulness, starts acting like your shadow is his to command. He flirts with other women. He speaks for you in council meetings. He forgets you weren't his conquest. You were the one holding the map. So one afternoon, over cherry pastries and polite conversation, you quietly inform him that his services are no longer required in your chambers. He blinks. He tries to recover. You offer him a military post in the provinces. He accepts. Eventually, historians argue whether you ever loved him. You never clarify. Because power isn't sentimental. And you've already buried one man with your name on his lips. Why not another? In the meantime, Russia moves. It stumbles, it groans, it coughs. But it moves. Under your rule, schools begin to open in places where books were once banned. Hospitals replace leech cellars. You even begin legal reforms, rewriting criminal codes, debating justice with men who still believe women are too delicate for law. You smile as they fumble, because your pen, when it moves, redraws more than borders. It rewrites fear, and fear, as you're starting to learn, is more useful than love. You host a dinner, and nobody eats. The roast goose goes cold. The wine is untouched. Crystal glasses sweat under the chandeliers like they know something the guests don't. The silence is thick tension, sliced so finely across the room that even the cutlery dares not clink. You're smiling. That, of course, is what terrifies them. The guest of honor is Count Panin, a brilliant mind with slippery loyalty and a gift for speaking circles around questions he doesn't want to answer. Tonight, you ask only one. Tell me, Count, what does loyalty mean to you? He freezes, fork halfway to his mouth. His eyes flick sideways toward other guests. He clears his throat. It means serving the good of the empire. You lean in, and who decides what is good? He blinks. That night you sign a quiet order. Panin will remain in his post, but his correspondence will now be copied, just in case. You also replace his personal secretary with one of your own. She's excellent with numbers and even better at secrets. This is your game now. You don't punish rebellion, you prevent it. Historians still argue whether your court was more surveillance state or social club. The truth is, it was both, depending on whether you were laughing with the Empress or being laughed at by her. You issue new court regulations. Some are practical limits on bribe, standard wages, even bathroom cleanliness. Others are psychological. One decree bans overly dramatic mourning outfits after 2 weeks of grief. You claim it's for hygiene, but everyone knows it's to stop widows from turning funerals into political theater. Another decree subtly rearranges seating at state dinners. Suddenly, the important nobles are seated farther from you. They pretend not to notice, but they do. You test loyalty in strange ways. One noble is instructed to arrive at court at 4 a.m. for a surprise audit. He complies. You never show, but you promote him a month later. The message obedience isn't about convenience. You've also developed a talent for discomfort. You speak in parables, half-truths, and oddly timed compliments. You'll ask someone their opinion on a philosophical matter, and then stare at them just long enough for them to wonder whether they passed some invisible exam. At a ball, a young aristocrat compliments your shoes. You smile. Pity your memory isn't as sharp as your eye. He turns pale. He doesn't dance again that night. You later send him a pair of your old slippers with a note for your collection. He resigns quietly 3 weeks later. Catherine the Great, perhaps. But the court whispers other titles now. the velvet hammer, the silent storm, the empress who blinks last. Because you don't yell, you don't need to. The Winter Palace does it for you. Its halls remember. They echo with footsteps of men who walked in bold and walked out forgotten. Every tapestry, every painting, every polished banister is part of your stage, and the performance is control. Not tyranny, not cruelty. Just reminders. Because fear, when dressed in pearls and lace, becomes indistinguishable from elegance. Still, you find moments to relax. You read Voltaire. You draft letters to Diderot. You bathe in goat's milk occasionally, because why not? You try Turkish coffee and declare it too bitter. You ride in sleighs too fast through parks too cold. The wind makes your eyes tear up. Not from sorrow, just speed. You are alive. You are in power. And that means everyone else is living on your terms. Even when you don't speak, especially then. Your power is secure now, at least on the surface. But power in Russia isn't a throne, it's a balancing act on frozen marble. One slip, one misplaced word, one rebellion lit by candlelight, and everything can tumble. You know this. So you do what no one expects. You start pouring tea. You invite diplomats, generals, writers, even rivals to small, intimate gatherings. No politics, no proclamations. Just warm cups, sweet cakes, and the sharpest tongue in the empire, wrapped in a silk robe. It unnerves them. You'll ask things like, do you think Russia is a patient nation? Or, what does mercy look like when the ground is frozen 10 months a year? They laugh, nervously. You pour more tea. But while they sip, you listen. You hear what they're not saying, what worries them, who they fear, what they long for when they think no one is watching. You store it all. Because secrets once collected can be shaped like snowballs. And you've gotten very good at throwing them downhill. Your court begins to fracture not publicly, not loudly, but along fine cracks. A glance here, a missing invitation there. One official's name left off a list of award recipients. Just enough to destabilize certainty. Historians still argue whether you engineered paranoia or merely let it bloom. But let's be honest, you knew exactly what you were doing. One noblewoman, once known for her wit and beauty, suddenly becomes very quiet at court. Rumors swirl. Did she offend you? Did she flirt with the wrong man? Or was it the letter she wrote last year, the one she thought was burned? You never say. You just greet her warmly every time you pass. Meanwhile, whispers of reform stir again. Enlightenment thinkers abroad are watching you. They write you letters praising your intellect, your policies, your strength. Voltaire calls you the Semiramis of the North. You write back with wit and charm and subtle hints that you are both admiring and above them. You are becoming an idea, not just a woman, not just an empress, but a symbol. The enlightened autocrat, the woman who reads, the empress who understands both ballet and battle. And while you correspond with philosophers in Paris, you also tighten your grip at home. You launch education initiatives, but you also censor books. You commission new law codes, but you exile those who speak too freely. You expand the empire, but you reduce voices. A contradiction, of course. But as you once told a foreign ambassador, I am a woman, sir. I can do two things at once. You find allies in unlikely places. A peasant woman who saves a noble's child from drowning, she's invited to court. A junior officer who exposes a smuggling ring promoted overnight. These are stories you let spread, not because you care for sentimentality, but because stories, when well told, become policy. And everyone at court begins to wonder, what will my story be? How will the Empress remember me? And that's the genius of your fear. It doesn't need dungeons. It doesn't need swords. It just needs uncertainty. You've weaponized doubt, and it glitters almost as beautifully as your crown. You're in the gardens when the messenger arrives, mud up to his shins, breathless eyes wide. There's a rebellion, a real one this time. Not a drunken noble muttering discontent over chess. Not a pamphlet passed hand to hand in a tavern. A full-scale, torch-in-hand, banner-waving peasant uprising kind of rebellion. Pugachev, a name that burns hot across the empire like wildfire in dry fields. A former Cossack officer or deserter, depending on who you ask, who claims to be your dead husband Peter. Yes, that Peter, the one already rotting in a quiet grave. He says he's alive. He says you're a usurper. He says he's here to restore justice. You sigh. You don't panic. Instead, you walk back into the palace and order tea. Strong. Your advisors are scrambling. They call him mad. They say the peasants will never follow him. You raise an eyebrow. And yet, they are. Because they are. He's not just gathering peasants. He's rallying Cossack serfs, even disaffected soldiers. They're looting towns, executing officials, and spreading stories like weeds in spring. And here's the terrifying part. Some of those stories feel true. Russia, after all, is not a gentle empire. Its peasants live in mud pay taxes they can't read and suffer winters that kill with patience. All it takes is one charismatic liar with a beard and a stolen banner, and suddenly the ground under your throne feels soft. You respond the only way you know how, with both velvet and steel. You issue new proclamations promising Mercyland reforms attention. But you also dispatch generals, and not the slow powdered wig kind, the brutal kind, the ones who understand that rebellions are best buried deep. Historians still argue whether your response was too harsh. Villages are burned, bodies are hung. Pugachev is captured in a cage. You have him publicly executed, drawn, and quartered. No symbolism spared, and no apology issued. Because this isn't just about crushing a rebellion. It's about sending a message. The court watches you closely afterward. They expect to see you shaken. You host a ball instead. The orchestra plays louder than usual. The wine flows faster. You dance like there's blood on your shoes, and maybe there is. One noble toast to the Empress, who silences pretenders. You smile politely. Pretenders are useful, you say. They remind people of the real thing. But deep down, you don't dismiss what happened. You've seen the fire. You've felt how thin the line is between reverence and rage. So you double down. You expand the secret police. You start tracking not just enemies, but potential enemies. You update the maps. You redraw borders. You make new alliances with those Cossacks who didn't rise against you yet. Because in Russia, every silence is temporary. Every smile is conditional. And every ally is one meal away from mutiny. You go to bed that night and stare at the ceiling. It's beautiful, painted in gold and sky blue, but you don't really see it. You're thinking of something your tutor once said to you in your youth: a crown is a target you choose to wear. And right now, that crown feels heavy. But you do not take it off. You never will. You wake up before dawn and the Winter Palace is quiet. Too quiet. No footsteps on marble, no whispers behind curtains. Just the breath of cold against stained glass windows and the faint creak of ice forming along the Neva. It's mornings like this when the weight of it all settles on your ribs. Not guilt, just magnitude. Russia is vast, almost unknowable. And it belongs to you, not by birth, not by marriage, but by choice, by risk, by nerve. But to keep it, that's the part no one warned you about. You sip your coffee bitter and black and begin your day. Your advisors arrive in threes like crows. They bring scrolls maps more bad news. Famine in the east. Banditry along the Volga. An envoy from Austria who keeps asking whether you plan to marry again. You don't answer because everyone keeps forgetting you're already married. To Russia. To duty. To the unspoken pact between ruler and ruled that says, I will carry this so you don't have to. You walk through the hall of portraits, all dead men mostly bearded. None of them smile. You don't either. You think of Peter, your son, not your late husband. He's almost grown now. Awkward, fidgety, with a nose that belongs more to the Romanovs than to you. He visits you less often. When he does, he bows like he's playing a part. He calls you Majesty now, instead of Mother. You correct him once. He doesn't repeat the mistake. Historians still argue whether your coldness was maternal instinct or political necessity. But deep down, you know the truth. You're not raising a son. You're raising a problem. One day he'll want your throne, not out of ambition, but out of entitlement. And you've worked too hard to hand it over to someone who's still figuring out how buttons work. So you push him into study, military training, ethics, philosophy, even agriculture. Anything to make him less dangerous and more useful. You begin drafting your own succession plans. Not because you're dying, but because you know what chaos smells like, and it's always just one heartbeat away. Meanwhile, your court continues its dance. Masquerades, hunting parties, spontaneous poetry readings. But everyone knows the real theater happens in your council chambers. You're rewriting tax codes while your rivals argue about where to seat a Bavarian duchess at dinner. You pass new laws. You limit the power of the nobility carefully, surgically. A cut here, a nudge there. No noble wants to admit they're weaker this month than last. And because you mask it in language like efficiency and stewardship, they nod along thinking it was their idea. That's your favorite trick, really. Making them believe they're in control, right until you rearrange the map beneath their feet. A general sends you a letter suggesting a military expansion. You send back a scarf. No note, just the scarf. He resigns a month later. Nobody ever asks why. Because the moment they start asking why you do something, they know they're already in trouble. You've become a master of measured dread. You don't rule with terror exactly. More like sophisticated unease. Enough to keep people on their toes. Enough to keep them grateful that they're still standing. And always, always just enough hope that they'll earn your smile next time. You go to bed that night without locking the door. Not because you trust anyone, but because if they ever do come for you, you want to meet them awake. They come bearing gifts now. Not just silks or jewels, those are expected, but stranger things. An ivory chess set carved by a blind monk. A falcon that refuses to perch for anyone but you. A handwritten copy of a banned French play, bound in green velvet with a note that simply reads, "For your amusement." You accept each offering with the same unreadable smile. It's not the gifts that matter. It's who's giving them and why. Some bring them in hopes of currying favor, others out of fear. And the most interesting ones, they bring gifts to test you. To see whether you still have an appetite for wonder, or if you've calcified into the kind of monarch who's forgotten what curiosity feels like. You make a point of reacting. Not too much, just enough. You laugh, you marvel, you raise an eyebrow. Because in court, emotion is strategy, and selective delight is a form of power. One evening, an ambassador from Sweden offers you a bottle of liquor aged 150 years in an underground chapel. You pour 2 glasses. You toast, clink, sip, and never break eye contact. He flinches first. You win. Again. Historians still argue whether your charm was innate or learned. Most agree on this. No one left your presence entirely certain of where they stood. And that's exactly how you liked it. You begin commissioning portraits. Dozens. Some are flattering, some are almost godlike. One artist dares to paint you as Minerva's spear in hand, crown atop a helmet scrolls of wisdom at your feet. You reward him with land. Another dares to paint you barefaced, older human. You reward him with twice as much. Because vanity is for amateurs. And you are not an amateur. You are building legacy. That word echoes in your head more often now. Legacy. Not in the grand abstract sense of history books, but in the quieter, more terrifying sense of what happens when you're gone. Because legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what others use against you once you're not there to defend it. So you begin writing. Not just letters, not just laws, but your memoirs. Carefully crafted, filtered through metaphor and modesty, with just enough scandal to keep them from being dismissed. You frame your reign as destiny, as survival, as proof that a woman can lead without unraveling the moral fabric of the empire. You omit certain names. You adjust timelines. You soften the blade. But you do it deliberately. Because truth, as you well know, is just power in past tense. Meanwhile, your advisors notice a change in you. You're still sharp, still relentless, but quieter, more precise. They call it maturity, but you know better. It's anticipation. Because you've ruled long enough to sense when the winds shift. Your enemies aren't loud anymore. They've gone underground. Into letters written in invisible ink. Into marriages arranged between cousins who never used to speak. Into silences that last a little too long after you enter the room. So you adjust. You revive old alliances. You elevate new families. One's too young to remember Peter. Too grateful to question your favor. You give away small powers deliberately. Land here. A minor title there. Just enough to distract. Because while they count their gifts, you're counting moves. Your legacy isn't secure yet. But you're playing the long game. And no one plays it better than you. You begin to favor the garden at twilight. Not because it's peaceful, it rarely is, but because that soft gray light plays tricks on the statues, makes them seem alive, watching, waiting, much like your courtiers. There's something comforting about marble. It doesn't flatter, it doesn't lie, and unlike humans, it doesn't whisper in corridors after too much wine. You stroll slowly past hedges, trimmed by servants who never speak unless spoken to. Birds retreat into shadow. A breeze disturbs the lilies. You pause, inhale, and let yourself think the dangerous thought, what if it all unraveled? What if the empire you stitched together with law and charm and veiled threats decided one morning? Enough historians still argue whether you ever feared this. But the truth is, of course you did. Only a fool doesn't fear revolution. You've seen what happens to those who forget how sharp the people's hunger can be. Hunger for bread, yes, but also for revenge, for novelty, for fire. You remember Pugachev. You remember how close his rebellion came to becoming a movement instead of a mutiny. That scar never fades. So you start testing the winds more deliberately. You order reports from the provinces, not just from governors, but from teachers, priests, even tavern owners. You want to know what people laugh at, what they complain about, what rumors make their way into songs. Because revolutions don't start with speeches. They start with jokes. You host an anonymous essay competition. Topic: what makes a ruler just. You claim it's for philosophical engagement, enlightenment values, education. But really, you want to see who's brave enough to criticize power in print and who they think they're writing about. Most play it safe. One essay is daring. Too daring. You read it 3 times. Then you hire the author. Better to have the clever ones inside your walls where you can see them, control them, name them. Meanwhile, you continue reforming. You push through a new statute on education. You fund more schools for girls. You declare that nobility is not a guarantee of competence, an idea so shocking that one elderly duke faints in the middle of his soup. You don't help him. He recovers. You promote his steward. Message received. But it's not all policy. There are parties, costumed balls, masquerades where everyone pretends to be someone else, which you've often thought is just a more honest version of court life. One night, you attend dressed as a shepherdess. You carry a crook, wear pearls in your hair, and listen to 3 different men confess political opinions to you under the mistaken belief that you're an actress hired to amuse the guests. You remember everything. The next day, 2 receive appointments. 1 receives exile. They all wonder why. You don't explain. You never explain. Because mystery, when paired with power, becomes myth. And myths are harder to overthrow. You've begun designing a new palace, smaller, more personal. A retreat, not a place to hide, just a place to think. You don't tell anyone how often you imagine walking away. How sometimes when the palace is still, you imagine slipping out the back gate and disappearing into the countryside. Not forever. Just long enough to remember what quiet sounds like when it isn't calculated. But of course you don't, because Russia doesn't let you vanish. And neither will history, not while you're still shaping it. Your physician tells you to rest more. He's concerned about your heart, your nerves, your appetite. You nod politely, thank him for his concern, and immediately schedule 3 new councils, a diplomatic luncheon, and a private performance of Orfeo ed Eurydice for the Danish ambassador. Rest is for people who don't have a continent resting on their spine. You've learned to sleep in pieces. 20 minutes between crises, an hour between storms. Your dreams are mostly architecture, endless corridors, locked doors, people you recognize but can't quite name. You start to notice the weight in your bones, the way your fingers ache after writing, the occasional misstep when you rise too quickly from a chair. The body is whispering what the courtiers are too cautious to say out loud. You are aging. Historians still argue whether this slowed you or sharpened you. Because even as your limbs resist, your mind slices cleaner than ever. You read faster. You notice more. You begin editing documents others thought were final. You correct grammar in foreign treaties. You send notes back to generals pointing out strategic errors they missed. They stop underestimating you. You start to enjoy the effect your age has on the room. You walk in slowly, deliberately, and the silence that follows is no longer out of fear. It's respect, or something close enough. One night, a young noble jokes that you must have 100 wigs to keep up appearances. You lean in, smile, and reply, "Only 97. I burned the others." They were too full of whispers. He never jokes again, but not everyone fears you now. Some simply admire. A young historian approaches you with trembling hands, asking to dedicate his book to you. You ask what it's about. He says power and restraint. You nod. You give him your quill. Because there's something satisfying about knowing the next generation doesn't just see you as a tyrant or a saint. They see the struggle. You were not born for this throne. You took it. And every day since you've had to keep it with eyes open and teeth ready. You continue to write. Letters, proclamations, observations. You annotate books in the margins, scrawling thoughts like too idealistic or utter nonsense. Or sometimes simply You begin thinking more often about memory. Not yours. Theirs. How they'll remember you. What stories they'll repeat. What statues they'll build. And what rumors they'll whisper after they pass them. You know you won't control it all. But you concede it. You start commissioning portraits again, this time more modest, thoughtful. One shows you holding a book instead of a scepter. Another, no crown at all. You aren't erasing the grandeur. You're broadening the myth. Let them debate which version was true. Let them argue over your legacy. Because as long as they're arguing, they're still saying your name. Meanwhile, Peter, your son, is restless. He writes you letters filled with veiled complaints and unsubtle ambition. You respond with affection, wrapped in steel. You will inherit what you understand, my dear, you write. And I'm not yet convinced you understand. He doesn't reply for months. You're not surprised. Still, you appoint him to a ceremonial post. Let him feel important. Let him speak at festivals. Let him wear the uniforms and wave. But never let him near the reins. Because you've seen what happens when weak men pretend to steer. Russia doesn't forgive that. And neither do you. You stand before the mirror one morning and see the lines carved deep into your face, not by age alone, but by vigilance. You trace one line with a fingertip and whisper, "Proof I was here." No one hears it. But the mirror nods anyway. You begin your day with thunder. Not literal thunder. The skies over St. Petersburg are clear for once, but a metaphorical kind. The kind that claps behind closed doors and rattles porcelain on council tables. A trade envoy has overstepped. Minor, really. A misfiled report, a bribe, too clumsy a rumor that you favor one merchant over another. Small sins, but in your court, small sins are warnings. Like smoke curling under a locked door. So you summon the envoy. He arrives sweating, bowing, speaking too quickly. You don't raise your voice. You don't threaten. You do something worse. You ask him to explain slowly. Every detail, every reason, every excuse. He runs out of words long before you run out of silence. You dismiss him with a wave, and later you strip him of title, land, and rank. Quietly, without ceremony. Historians still argue whether this was cruelty or consistency. But they all agree Catherine does not tolerate incompetence, especially not from those who confuse proximity with privilege. You didn't survive this long by letting anyone feel too safe. The court takes note. The hallways buzz. One man's ruin is another's reminder. You host a concert that evening. A visiting Italian pianist. Swirling melodies, candlelight, and pastries that cost more than some villages. You sit front row, every ring on your hand, catching the firelight. Behind you, your advisors squirm. They're not sure if tonight is a celebration or a warning. You like that. You've always believed that uncertainty is a kind of leash, and if you hold it gently, it tightens itself. You take a moment during the concert to scan the room. Faces lit by music, eyes avoiding yours. Fans fluttering, masks slipping. You notice one courtier, newly appointed, overly eager, glancing too often at your military attaché. You make a mental note. Tomorrow, that attaché will receive a new assignment, somewhere cold, somewhere far. You don't punish desire. You punish carelessness. Russia is not a playground. And your court is not a love story, it's a chessboard, polished and brutal. Still, your own heart surprises you sometimes. A letter arrives from a child 10 years old from a remote village writing in shaky ink. She thanks you for building a school. She says she wants to be wise like the Empress. You reread it 3 times. You send back books, not toys, not lace, books. Because that's how you build a legacy that outlives statues. You host a council the next morning. Topics: taxation, border security, the suspicious quiet out of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. But the most heated debate, a theater grand. You argue in favor. Your generals grumble, you overrule them. Armies win battles, you say. But stories win generations. They fall silent. You leave early and spend the afternoon riding. Fast, alone, through fields stiff with frost. The wind stings your cheeks flush, and for a moment you remember being young. Just a German girl named Sophie dreaming of languages, not kingdoms. That girl is gone, but not forgotten. You carry her inside you, tightly wrapped, like a secret, like a blade. You're back in the Winter Palace, standing before a map the size of a ballroom rug. Russia sprawls across it like a sleeping bear paw in the Baltic belly in the steppes, nose brushing China. So vast it almost feels fictional. But it isn't. It's yours. And today you are deciding whether to make it larger. There's tension near the Black Sea. The Ottomans are restless again, puffing their chests, rattling sabers, flexing over treaties written in ink that has barely dried. Your generals want action. Your diplomats want time. Your treasury wants none of it. You want leverage. So you host a dinner. Candles, crystal courtiers, and embroidered silk. The Turkish ambassador sits to your left. He laughs too loudly at your jokes, wipes sweat from his brow with a napkin embroidered with your initials. You ask him about trade, about horses, about poetry. Then you ask him softly, "How's morale in the Janissary Corps these days?" He spills wine. Perfect. Historians still argue whether that question was strategy or instinct. You don't care. It worked. A week later, he's back with new terms. More generous, less arrogant. You accept with grace and a smile sharp enough to slice mutton. You know when to hold fire and when to light the fuse. Meanwhile, back at court, the nobles are becoming anxious again. Not because of war, but because of you. You've begun spending more time with scholars, with architects, with people who don't bow quite so deeply, who ask questions no one else dares to ask. You enjoy their company. It reminds you that power isn't just inherited or seized, it's understood. One evening, a courtier approaches you during a masquerade, dressed as Neptune trident and all. He makes a joke about how you rule land and sea. You smile and reply, "Just the parts I can walk through in heels." He blinks. You leave him blinking. But even you know charm isn't enough. So you launch a new project. A grand canal, something to bind cities together, make trade faster, make movement smoother. The people see it as progress. You see it as control, because water is a weapon too. Flood it, freeze it, reroute it, and you change everything. The canal is expensive. Your advisors grumble, but you press on. You've learned that great rulers build things that outlast their critics. Statues crumble, but roads stay. And nothing says stability like stone. Peter, your son, visits briefly. He's taller now, polished, practiced. He compliments your reforms, mentions the canal, tries too hard to impress. You offer him wine. He declines. You smile and say, "Ah, moderation," a dangerous habit for a Romanov. He does not laugh. Later, he writes a letter to a Prussian general complaining of emotional exile. You intercept it. You don't punish him. You just assign him more duties. Bureaucratic, boring, binding. Because ambition, when caged, becomes manageable. And no one manages better than you. Outside, the first snow begins to fall. Inside, the fire crackles. You sit by the hearth with your dogs at your feet and a volume of Greek philosophy open in your lap. One of your ladies-in-waiting asks what you're reading. You say, "How to Outthink a God." She doesn't know if it's a joke. You don't clarify. You turn the page. And the room stays very, very quiet. Morning fog creeps through the streets like gossip. You stand on a balcony above it all, sipping coffee that's still too hot, watching the spires of St. Petersburg blur into ghosts. It feels appropriate, an empire built on ice and shadows, and you perched above, half invisible, fully aware. Today brings a visitor, not a foreign dignitary, not a prince, someone more dangerous, a philosopher. A French one, to be precise. One of the Enlightenment's darlings, recently exiled from his own salons, now eager to bask in the glow of your court. He smells of ink arrogance and Parisian conviction. You meet him in your library. He bows too deeply, speaks too quickly, and quotes Rousseau before you've even finished your tea. You listen. You nod. You smile. And then you casually dismantle his argument with a reference to Macedonian land reforms and two well-timed questions about practical governance. He's charmed and terrified. Historians still argue whether you were a true Enlightenment monarch or merely performed the role to gain prestige in the West. But you know the truth. You believe in ideas, just not more than you believe in stability. So you let them talk. Let the philosophers imagine they've inspired reforms. Let the writers think their words move empires. Meanwhile, you move troops. You fund printing presses, yes, but also expand your network of informants. For every school you build, you assign a steward. For every letter that arrives praising liberty, a copy is made and filed away. Because knowledge is power. But information is insurance. That afternoon, you host a small gathering, just poets, composers, and the odd astronomer. It's meant to be informal, civilized. But you still choose your dress carefully, deep blue stars embroidered across the hem. You are the constellation they orbit. At one point, a violinist plays something so achingly beautiful that you forget yourself and lean forward completely still. No one breathes. Even empires, it seems, require a soundtrack. Later that evening, you retreat to your study, thinking not of music, but of Poland. Ah, yes. Poland, always the problematic neighbor. Fragmented, politically feeble, deliciously vulnerable. There's talk of partition, of carving it up like a roast at a banquet, each empire taking a slice. You don't oppose the idea, you refine it. Because where others see land, you see leverage. You send letters, not commands, suggestions, gentle nudges to Prussia and Austria, accompanied by generous compliments and thinly veiled warnings. It's not long before Poland begins to crack. Your court watches this with fascination. Will she really take it, they whisper. A woman slicing up a kingdom, you hear the whispers. You sharpen the knife. And then you make your move, not loudly, not all at once, but with the elegance of someone buttering bread. By the time the ink dries, the world blinks, and Poland is smaller. You host another masquerade, because nothing says diplomatic victory like powdered wigs and sugared almonds. One guest arrives in a costume shaped like a map. You raise your glass and say, "Careful. I may redraw you." The laughter is nervous. Perfect. Peter sends another letter. He's upset about Poland, thinks it's dishonorable, thinks it will sully Russia's reputation. You respond with a single sentence, "Empires are not built for applause." No reply. But that's fine. Silence, too, is an answer. Outside, the fog has lifted, but you still stand in shadow. Not out of fear, but because that's where you see the best. The palace corridors echo differently in winter, not louder, just sharper, as if the walls themselves have grown ears, storing every footstep, every hushed laugh, every cautious confession behind velvet drapes. You like it. People are more careful when their words might leave footprints. This morning you wake to 2 sealed envelopes. One is gilded an invitation to a royal wedding in Saxony. The other is plain sealed in wax without a crest, anonymous. You open that one first. It's a warning about a plot, about a name you recognize, about a debt unpaid and a favor turned threat. You reread it, then burn it. Historians still argue whether you took such threats seriously, but you've outlived enough poisonings, betrayals, and whispered assassins to know this: the truly dangerous plots never come with warnings. Still, you increase security discreetly. You have new guards posted along unfamiliar hallways. You rotate your food tasters more frequently. You even change your route through the palace gardens just slightly. You don't live in fear. You live in awareness. And that makes all the difference. Meanwhile, the nobles grow restless. Not because they know something is coming, but because they don't. You've become too still. And in politics, stillness is its own kind of thunder. So you host a symposium. Topic: the nature of sovereignty. You invite diplomats, poets, professors. You moderate the discussion personally, asking pointed questions in a voice so calm it turns confidence into confusion. One baron claims that true power lies in consent. You smile and say, "And if the people consent to a crown worn by fire, do you remove it?" The room falls silent. The baron pales. You change the subject to agriculture. That's your favorite trick, planting questions that bloom hours later far from your presence. You've started rereading your own correspondence lately, not out of vanity, but to watch how your tone has shifted. Early letters were earnest, wordy, idealistic. Now they are sharp, elegant, efficient. Each phrase measured like a surgeon's cut, precise enough to heal, sharp enough to kill if needed. You begin drafting a new legal code. Not to enforce it yourself, though you could, but because the very act of writing law reminds people you still shape the spine of the nation. One article proposes equal rights for merchants, regardless of noble status. The aristocracy blinks. You don't blink back. You hold salons with economists and architects now. You ask about grain flow, urban density, canal locks. Let the others chase court gossip. You are engineering permanence. One advisor questions whether the peasantry is ready for such reform. You look him in the eye and say, "They don't need to be ready." I do. He retires the following spring. Voluntarily, of course. You write him a very kind letter and assign someone younger to his post, someone grateful, someone who knows how quickly history forgets the hesitant. You end the day in your private greenhouse tending to a citrus tree that shouldn't survive in Russian soil. It's stubborn. So are you. You water it carefully, gently brushing frost from its leaves, because everything worth keeping must be coaxed, not commanded. Outside, snow begins to fall again. Inside, you whisper to the tree, "Grow anyway." They begin calling you the North's Minerva. You pretend not to notice, but you do. Oh, you absolutely do. It starts as flattery, one poet's clever attempt to secure a grant, but soon the phrase spreads. It slips into essays, appears in court gossip, and eventually gets printed on the programs for your winter opera gala. You find it both amusing and useful, because what better armor than wisdom, what better disguise than divinity? If they see you as a goddess, they stop searching for the seams. You lean into it just a little. You start wearing more silver. You have one portrait commissioned with an owl perched near your writing desk. You even begin signing some of your private essays with a single letter M. Mystery is a currency, And right now, you are minting it in abundance. Historians still argue whether you believed your own myth. But that's the wrong question. The better one is, did you care as long as it worked? Your court, meanwhile, is adjusting. They're learning your rhythms. The ones who survive longest are the ones who stop trying to predict you and start learning to pivot with you. One noblewoman, sharp-eyed and braver than most, starts mirroring your habits. She hosts salons. She quotes philosophy. She keeps pet dogs that resemble yours. You watch her, not with suspicion, with interest. Because succession isn't always about blood, it's about echo. Peter is still Peter. Moody, formal, inadequate. You send him on another diplomatic tour. Let him wave in foreign courts. Let him be charming in measured doses. Just not here. Here you are, the atmosphere. And anything he brings would fog the glass. Meanwhile, you begin assembling a private council, small, agile, loyal, not officially recognized, not even named, but effective. They call themselves the Room Beyond. You let them. Their job anticipate unrest before it becomes reportable. Listen where ears aren't supposed to be. Track where influence is building and where it's about to break. You meet in strange places, a gardener's shed, a wine cellar, once in an empty wing of the palace where even the rats walk lightly. You speak softly. You move maps. You change futures. One night, someone suggests you're becoming paranoid. You reply, only amateurs wait for the fire before filling the buckets. They never suggest it again. Still, there are days when the wait surprises you. You're walking through the gallery paintings of your past selves in every frame when you stop in front of one in particular. It shows you in armor hair, coiled like a crowned hand on a globe. The brushstrokes are bold. The gaze is unblinking. You don't recognize her. Not entirely. She looks like someone you needed to be once, but not anymore. You stare for a long time, then you nod and walk on. Because that's the truth of power. It evolves, or it evaporates. You begin drafting a new letter to your son, not to scold, to explain. You tell him what it takes, what it costs, what you gave up to make Russia not just a place, but a presence. You sign it not as mother or empress, but simply Catherine. Because someday when the fire finally reaches the archives, you want them to know you weren't a myth. You were a mind, and you were watching. You wake before the servants again. It's still dark, quiet enough that even the clocks seem unsure whether they should be ticking yet. You sit upright in your bed, not startled, just ready, as if your body knows something the calendar doesn't. Something is shifting. You dress simply, no brocade, no gold. Just a slate gray gown and your favorite pair of soft boots, the ones no one hears coming. You slip into the corridor before the palace begins to breathe. Downstairs, the kitchen smell of heat and yeast. Someone hums behind a door. Somewhere a feather duster falls and someone whispers an apology to no one. You make your way to your study. There's a letter on the desk, though no one should have placed one there. No seal, no signature, just your name on the outside, Catherine. You open it. Inside is a poem, short, awkward, clearly not written by a professional. But it speaks of a woman who wears iron beneath silk, a woman whose footsteps shape nations, a woman who listens. You read it twice. You never learn who wrote it. You never try to find out. Because sometimes mystery is more nourishing than clarity. You add it to the drawer where you keep the other oddities, tokens from peasants, anonymous thank yous, a drawing from a child in Georgia who thinks you live in the clouds. You don't live in the clouds. You live on the edge. And lately that edge is getting thinner. The situation in Poland has boiled again. A resistance is forming. Young men with too much fire and not enough planning. They scribble pamphlets. They sharpen knives. They call you the crowned serpent. You respond with precision. Not war yet, just letters. Pressure, presence. You fund certain newspapers. You promote certain Polish nobles sympathetic to your aims. You make promises you don't intend to keep and threats you absolutely do. Historians still argue whether you crushed Polish independence or simply postponed it. But one thing is certain, you knew what was coming, and you met it first. At court, the mood is brittle. Everyone feels the tension, but pretends not to. The music gets louder. The jokes get stranger. You attend a ball where someone dresses as a diplomatic incident. It's clever, too clever. You dance once, then leave early. No explanation. You retreat to your observatory. Yes, you have an observatory now. It was built 2 summers ago quietly on the western wing where few venture. You visit at night when sleep refuses to stay. You stare at planets, at stars, at patterns older than any empire. They comfort you, not because they promise permanence, but because they remind you that even chaos has coordinates. One evening, as you adjust the telescope, a servant asks gently, "Majesty, what are you looking for?" You reply without turning, "A future I haven't already written." They don't understand. They don't need to. You turn back to the sky and squint harder. Because you know the court sees Catherine the Great. But the stars, they see the girl who once read by candlelight, dreaming not of power, but of meaning. You sit at your writing desk, hands folded, not writing. For the first time in months, you're simply still. Outside, the snow falls in slow, deliberate spirals, as if nature itself is pacing your breath. The palace has quieted for the evening. The footmen have finished polishing the sconces, the nobles have retreated to their card tables, and the dogs are asleep beneath your chair, dreaming the simple dreams of creatures who never had to choose between peace and power. You're thinking about legacy again. Not the monuments, not the treaties, not the battles etched into textbooks with your name engraved like a sword hilt. No, you're thinking about the spaces in between, the decisions no one saw, the ones you never admitted aloud, the instincts that kept your hand steady while your mind screamed otherwise. Historians still argue whether your greatness came from your mind or your mask. But they miss the point. It came from the marriage of both. You weren't born into this steel. You forged it, and now you wear it lightly, but always. Tonight, you return to your old diaries. Not the official ones kept for posterity and politics, but the small volumes hidden behind a false panel in your bookcase. Their leather bindings have softened with age like well-used gloves. You run your fingers across entries you barely remember writing. One says simply, "I must learn how to make men speak the truth without realizing it." Another, "He lied well." Reward him. Better to keep clever liars close. You smile, not because it's funny, because it worked. You learned again and again how to extract loyalty without demanding it, to make obedience feel like affection, to make fear feel like respect. These weren't tricks. They were architecture. And every choice, every silence, every slow blink at the right moment was a brick. Meanwhile, the rumors of your failing health grow louder. You're not sure who started them. Probably someone ambitious, or anxious, or both. You don't correct them. Let them wonder. Let them watch the throne like a hawk over a dying deer, only to realize you're not dying, you're waiting. Because sometimes fear isn't about what you'll do next. It's about when. Still, your body whispers reminders. A knee that stiffens in the cold. A tremor that dances across your hand when no one's looking. You acknowledge them like old rivals, respected but not feared. You double your riding schedule. You spend longer in your cold baths. You keep your gait firm, even on the slipperiest floors. One morning, you fall. No one sees. You do not cry out. You do not wince. You rise and make a note to replace the rug with something less treacherous. You begin dictating more letters than you write by hand. Not because you can't, but because it saves time. And time lately feels more expensive than rubies. Your dictation assistant, a boy of barely 16, once stammers while trying to pronounce succession. You pause and say, it's a word that sounds heavier than it is, until it isn't. He doesn't ask what you mean. He just nods and keeps writing. You like him. You may recommend him for a post in the archives, where the truly dangerous stories are shelved. After all, you've always known it's not what's told in public that shapes a nation. It's what gets preserved in silence. There's a frost on the window panes this morning that looks almost deliberate lace made by weather patterns drawn in hush. You stare at it for a long moment before dressing. The court expects you today. A ceremony for a new naval officer, a portrait unveiling, a ballet rehearsal. You're supposed to smile at all the right things and frown thoughtfully at the others. You're expected to be Catherine, not a person, but a presence. But something inside you hesitates. Not from fatigue, not from illness, from calculation. You've learned that absence can speak louder than attendance. So for once you stay in your rooms. Let the court wonder. Let the rumors spark. Let them ask each other, is she sick? Is she plotting? Is she angry? You write a single line in your diary today, I am the echo they fear. And then you take tea, alone. It's not weakness, it's choreography. The Empress disappears, and suddenly every footstep in the hallway becomes a question mark. Historians still argue whether you manipulated perception or merely understood its gravity. But perception is not accidental. It's authored. Like a play with shifting acts, and you always one step ahead of the script. In the afternoon, you do something uncharacteristic. You invite 3 schoolgirls' children from a nearby academy you've quietly funded to the palace for lunch. They arrive wide-eyed, dressed in identical wool coats, and speak in rehearsed sentences that tumble like dominoes. You let them relax. You ask them what they want to be. One says a doctor, one says a painter. The last says, I want to be like you. You ask, what do you think I am? She says, a woman who doesn't ask permission. You laugh, a real one. That night you cancel the evening's audience. Instead you walk through the sculpture gallery with only one attendant trailing your hand across the cold marble shoulder of Caesar, then Trajan, then a bust of yourself that's slightly too flattering. You pause at one statue, a faceless female form, arms, outstretched cloak swirling. You never approved this one. You're not even sure who commissioned it. Beneath it is one word, order. You tilt your head. You whisper, not yet. Because order, true order, isn't static. It breathes. It adapts. It watches from behind masks until the moment it needs to step forward. And then it does so, not with a shout, but with a whisper sharpened into steel. You receive an urgent note from the southern provinces. Whispers of rebellion, grain shortages, a priest preaching sedition in muddy sermons. You don't panic. You send grain first, then troops, then a playwright. Because bread satisfies the body, bayonets satisfy fear, and stories seal the cracks. The priest is arrested. The rebellion dies in echo. The playwright stays behind and writes a comedy about potatoes. The people laugh and forget why they were angry. The next morning the frost is gone, but your name is etched even deeper in the glass. The candlelight flickers as you lean over a map of the southern frontier, an expanse of ink and possibility. The courtiers believe you spend your nights with novels and wine. Let them. Instead, you trace rivers with your fingertip. You mark supply routes with a pearl-handled compass. You sketch defenses while the palace sleeps, because you know peace is a hallway with trapdoors, and you've walked it long enough to memorize every creak. This evening's report includes a curious detail: an officer in Crimea has been bribed with French silk and promises of a freer Russia. You smile. They always try silk first, as if lace can unweave you. You draft a short note, replace him, quietly. No explanation, just architecture. Historians still argue whether you overreacted to dissent or snuffed out threats with surgical precision. The answer is probably yes, because the two are not mutually exclusive. At court, your absence from public events has begun to stir louder whispers. One lady suggests you're preparing a successor. One baron insists you're already dead and replaced by a double. One poet writes a sonnet called "When the Sun Holds Her Breath." You reward him with a warm cloak and a basket of oranges. He gets the message. You decide to hold an audience, not for politics, for art. You open the palace galleries to the public, something no monarch has done. You walk among the visitors, unannounced, unguarded. A child points at your portrait and says, "She looks like a storm." You lean down and say, "That's because she was painted during one." You spend the next hour explaining brushstrokes, framing choices, pigment types. Not to boast, to teach. Because if they understand what lasts, they might choose better things to build. Back in your study, a strange ache settles in your ribs. Not sharp, not alarming, just there, like memory's way of stretching. You ignore it. There's a letter to draft, to a Persian ambassador requesting an alliance. You write not as ruler to ruler, but as mind to mind. You quote poets. You praise geography. You suggest a partnership that benefits both on paper and on pride. Diplomacy, after all, is a kind of flirtation. You seal the letter with black wax, rare, unnerving, elegant. Let them wonder. You spend the following day interviewing architects for a new library wing. One presents a design shaped like a spiral shell. You nod slowly, tracing the lines. He says, "It represents endless discovery." You say, "It looks like strategy." He blinks. You hire him. Later, you visit your personal physician. You don't admit why. He checks your pulse, your breathing, your posture. He says, "You're tired." You say, "I'm ruling." He prescribes walks and warm milk. You prescribe yourself victory, because time, that stubborn governor, has started shortening your leash. You feel it in how quickly days vanish now. But you're not panicked. You're preparing. There are letters left to write, mistakes left to correct, and one more silence you must shape before you're through. You lean back in your chair, gaze fixed on the storm outside, and say softly, "Not yet." The snow outside has turned to sleet, hammering softly against the palace glass, like time tapping its fingers. You are awake before dawn again, not from restlessness, from resolve. Today you intend to finish something you began years ago, your final set of reforms. They're not dramatic, not the kind that make statues or headlines, but they are structural. Land use laws, education provisions, inheritance clauses designed to prevent exactly the sort of chaos that once brought your own rise. You once said, "A good law outlives the ruler who wrote it." This will be your echo. You call in 3 advisors, trusted, seasoned, not prone to flattery. You hand them your notes, let them review in silence. One clears his throat and says, "Majesty, this could anger the nobility." You sip your tea and reply, "I'm not writing to please the comfortable." The silence after that is perfect. Historians still argue whether these reforms were necessary or symbolic. You know the answer. They were insurance. Because the truest power isn't in what you control today, it's in what remains controlled after you leave. In the afternoon, you summon your artist. Yes, him the one you had banished once for painting you too young. You want a final portrait, not for vanity, for clarity. You tell him, paint me as I am. No crowns, no smoke. He hesitates. You say you'll only get this one chance. Make it honest. He nods pale. The sitting takes 3 hours. You don't pose. You sit at your desk, reviewing maps, drafting letters, eyes focused on something just beyond the frame. When it's over, you don't ask to see the sketch. You trust that history will view your face, whether you like it or not. Instead, you walk the palace gardens, bare trees, brittle air paths you've walked 1,000 times. You run your hand over a sundial you had installed decades ago. Its inscription reads, "I mark only the bright hours." You think, what a liar. Because you've ruled through blizzards, through betrayals, through mornings where the only thing bright was your refusal to break. A letter arrives from Vienna. An invitation, some ceremonial summit. You decline. You're not traveling anymore. Not physically, anyway. Your thoughts are elsewhere now, years ahead. You send a final set of instructions to the archive keepers. Organize your correspondence, label the restricted sections, seal the personal essays until 30 years after your death. Let them stew. Let them wonder what truths you kept locked away. Because every great reign deserves one last puzzle. As evening falls, you host a quiet supper. No ministers, no heirs, just the astronomer, the playwright, and your librarian. You talk of stars, of comets, of how certain plays are only funny when read aloud, of which books smell best when opened in winter. No one mentions politics. It is for once a night free of empire. And when they leave, you linger by the fire. Your dogs curl up beside you. The sleet has stopped. The silence now is not heavy. It is earned. And tomorrow, well, there is only one section left, and it belongs to you. The final morning arrives not with thunder, but with hush. No trumpets, no sudden omens. Just the usual winter chill, the slow glide of palace servants, lighting lamps, the smell of bread, baking 3 floors down. You stir in bed aware of everything, the weight of the blanket, the sound of your own heartbeat, the faint tick of a clock that no one winds anymore. You sit up slowly. There's a moment so small it nearly slips away, where you wonder if this is the day you'll fall and not rise again. Then you stand. Because of course you do. You dress plainly by your standards, a wool gown, a silver brooch, boots made for silence. No crown, no fanfare, just readiness. Today's agenda is deliberately light a visit to the East Wing Archives tea, with your personal steward a short note to the military garrison near the Black Sea. But behind each item lies closure. The archives have been reorganized according to your final orders. You stroll between rows of bound histories, touching spines like old friends. You smile at one title, The Brief Reign of Peter III. Brief indeed. You pass a locked cabinet that holds your own letters. You don't open it. You already know what they say. You move on. Tea is served in the blue salon. Sunlight pours through the frost-kissed windows, turning steam into silk above the cup. You don't drink much. You're distracted, not with dread, with calculation. You write one final directive to your steward: ensure my dogs are well cared for. Let the astronomer keep the observatory. Burn the green dress, I never liked it. You pause, then add. And if the weather's kind, open the garden gates next spring. Historians still argue whether you sensed the end coming. But how could you not, You designed your life with too much intention to miss the final note. Even the storm outside feels arranged. In the evening, you return to your private study. The fire's low. The curtains are drawn. The air tastes faintly of ink and lavender. You take out one last sheet of paper. No crest, no title. Just a final message, let the record show I was not afraid. You fold it once, no seal. You place it beneath your favorite book one with pages dog-eared by sleepless nights and margins filled with questions no one else ever read. And then, you breathe. You sit. You close your eyes, not in sleep, not quite, but in settling. The empire tonight is whole. And you are still Catherine, still the storm, still the architect, still here, even as the candle flickers low, even as history holds its breath. And now, dear listener, let your breath slow. Let your mind drift away from marble halls and trembling courtiers, from quills scratching secrets and boots pacing frozen floors. You've traveled through a reign wrapped in whispers and veiled in steel, through decisions that shaped borders and silences that rewrote destiny. Catherine the Great did not stumble into power, she built it, stone by stone, fear by fear, choice by deliberate choice. She was not perfect. She was not merciful. But she was real. And in the soft quiet after the thunder of empires, she remains. Etched not in marble, but in margins. Not just in museums, but in memories. In every law still obeyed. In every shadow where power holds its breath. Now let that imagery fade. Let the velvet curtains draw closed. Let the echo of boots on palace stone fall silent. Wherever you are tonight, whether under heavy blankets or curled up beneath stars, allow yourself just for a while to carry no crowns, no weight of thrones, only the soft certainty that even in a world ruled by storms, stillness has power. So rest easy, dear listener. You've earned it.